All right. Gotta have faith. This is Faith Goldy, twitter.com/Faith Goldy, youtube.com/Faith J Goldy, to be differentiated from all the other ones. Thanks so much for taking the time today.
Merry Christmas, Stefan. Thanks for having me on.
Merry Christmas to you too. So you had, I think, even more of a direct winter frost experience of Christmas than I did, because I grew up in England where you kind of have slightly warm, like summer comes on a Wednesday, sometime in June. And then you got this kind of bone-chilling, foggy coldness, but very little snow. I can remember it maybe once or twice my entire childhood. It snowed. Then I came to Canada in 1977, which was a record snowstorm, like snowdrifts higher than half a house. And I thought, man, this is the greatest thing ever. This is what Christmas is supposed to be. And I think Canada is pretty much, at least for now, the best place on the planet to experience Christmas. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Every Christmas is a white Christmas. And I think that folks, especially in kind of close to the border where I live in Toronto, they have had a similar experience where most of December, it won't snow. We don't know if it's going to snow, and everyone's got their fingers crossed for a white Christmas. And sure enough, whether it be a Christmas miracle every single year, call it what you will, it's always just been so beautiful, this fresh snowfall, and you go out tobogganing around that time of year. It just goes. I mean, I've been down south for various Christmases in my day, and while I love seeing all the palm trees with their lights, I mean, they do their best. There's nothing like seeing all of our pine trees adorned with these heavy fall of snow. It goes. It feels great.
And the thing is, let me tell you something. Coming to Canada is the most amazing thing, because I got introduced to a true suit of armor known as the snowsuit. Now, those of you who don't, did you ever, you basically are bulletproof. You're absolutely invulnerable. Like herds of wildebeest can trample you and you just get up and walk it off. You can go flying off a sled, spread eagle, sort of silhouetting through trees, crashing through every branch, and you just walk it off. And I had never experienced that kind of superpower of the snowsuit before I came to Canada.
Absolutely. It takes snowball fights to a whole different level, because all of a sudden you feel all sorts of corporal daring, and you feel like you can thrust yourself, onto these snowbanks, and who really cares? Because like you said, you're impermeable. It's certainly a look, the snowsuit, let me tell you.
Well, yeah, it's one of the, I guess it's the final dream of the Star Trek unisex uniform, because who knows what the heck's going on, especially when the hair's back and you're young. But I remember the first time I went tobogganing, I didn't know what I was doing, and I flew off, and I sort of double flipped through the air, landed on my head, and as I was going down, I'm like, oh, that's it, I'm dead, because if you do that in England, you're dead. But I was like, it was amazing. I landed on this beanbag pillow of Canadian softness, got up, walked it off, and I was like, I wanted people to just drive cars into me. I felt like I had these, does this thing allow me to fly? Because it allows me to be impervious to all physical injury.
It's truly liberating. It is. And there's something about that lack of conception of consequences that you get. It's like it brings you back to being a kid. Honestly, as soon as you put on that snowsuit and you're playing around in the snow, there's not a care in the world anymore. It's just it's a unique time of year, absolutely, and it gets you into a headspace that I think a lot of us as adults, especially ones who are so totally immersed in worries about the world, etc. It's just it's freeing. It's really, really special.
Well, and that was for me the pluses. The minus was the skating. Oh,
Are you not a good skater, Stefan?
Well, let me put it to you this way, Faith. I was not entirely an excellent skater when I arrived at the age of 11, having never even seen a pair of skates before. And of course, Canadians, a lot of cultures enjoy giving birth in sort of lukewarm water. Not many people know, of course, that if it's winter, you just give birth directly over the ice. The children come out with skates already on them, and they're expected to skate to the village and back to pick up their formula. And so when I first came to Canada, first of all, I rented the skates, and I didn't have anyone with me. My mom was working, so I rented the skates. I went out. I get on the ice, and I'm like, man, this is fundamentally impossible. I got no grips, no. And then somebody did stop and was kind enough to inform me that there was a thing called skate guards that it is quite important to remove in order to have any capacity to get a grip on the ice. Now, after that, it became slightly easier, except for all the hockey kids, because I was a bit of a formal young Lord Fauntleroy. I guess I still am a little bit. So I was out there in my best private school pants and so on. And I remember the hockey kids come out, hey, silver pants, straight with the elbows. And I'm just, Now, if I had been wearing my snowsuit, I would have been fine. But tragically, I wasn't.
Well, here now, I was not a hockey player. I'm first of all a female, and I'm not big onto females in that sport, to be honest. Although I understand there are some special ones that are good at it. And I am one of the very few Canadians who's not actually really big into hockey. I know this is awful. I have a campaign of one called Canucks Against the Puck, and it's not playing. I'm fine with you doing it, as a recreational sport, but just to watch it, don't see the strategy. It just seems like a bunch of guys all beating each other over the ice, and I like strategy in sports, so that's why I never really pursued it either as a spectator or as indeed a participant. But I was a figure skater once upon a time, and so let me tell you, it's quite the feat, because of course you don't have all of the body armor on you. So if you come crashing down, it's just those pantyhose that are keeping you and your knees and your ice separated. So it's both cold and can be at times painful. But yeah, those are some of my good winter memories too, was my mom doing up my skates as a kid. You're taking me back down memory lane now. This is nice.
Well, here's the thing, too. If you're a hockey player, you do have, of course, all of the equipment. Plus, you've got a fairly bulky set of muscles and some body fat and so on. They're not always known to be doing a whole lot of sit-ups because, you can't see the abs through 14 feet of padding. But if you were a figure skater, it basically is like being a ballet dancer over a bed of nails, because you have almost no body fat. You have no padding whatsoever. And I've just always been amazed at the courage it takes for the figure skaters to do these impossible things, knowing that, certain icy, iron-footed doom awaits them if there's one little slip-up.
I always kind of felt bad for the guy figure skaters, though, because I remember where I skated particularly, there was one rink for the figure skaters, and just beside us, behind the clear plexiglass, there was the hockey rink. And I always felt like the guys that were figure skating would kind of look over at the hockey players and be like, I don't know which one of us got the better deal. I'm hanging with the girls, but you guys look way more macho than we do. So there you have it.
Well, and it's a funny thing, too. I remember when I went for my citizenship in Canada, the only thing I was particularly concerned about was whether they were going to ask me any particularly strategic questions about how hockey is played. Because, I mean, like you, there's some games like I fathom. I understand. Like, okay, cricket, I understand why it's 3 days. I'm not saying I approve. I'm just saying I understand why it can be 3 days. American football, I've kind of got. But hockey, I get the general concept. And I remember when I was in the business world, we used to get ringside seats for clients. And we would go down to the hockey game, and I basically would have to wait to see who was cheering, and then I would always be like a millisecond behind because I'm just tracking, I'm like the guy swimming behind the icebreaker. And, people would be like, hey, that's icing. And it's like, dude, it's all ice. What does this even mean? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I hear you there. I feel bad because I always get pushback from a lot of my friends who say, how can you not be about hockey? I mean, you're a Canadian. Don't all Canadians love it? But I'm telling you, when I'm watching it, and even if you have a couple of great Canadian beers along the way, it doesn't help to understand it anymore. I just see guys, I understand the concept is to get the puck inside the net. I got you. But other than that, I don't see how you're executing as a team getting it there. I mean, with football, you can see every inch that's gained, where the plays are, and how everyone's intermingling with each other. But I think a lot of hockey, from my very, very layperson's vantage point, is just kind of chaos and circumstance.
Well, and there are games that make no sense with oldie time televisions. Like with new high def and flat screens, it makes more sense. But I remember as a kid watching things like golf. We used to watch Wimbledon all the time. And even with hockey, 12-inch black and white television with about 4 pixels, you really can't tell where any ball smaller than the Thunderdome is anywhere on the screen. Could be anywhere. You just have to wait for people to cheer to see if something happened. And then maybe in the slow replay, you see that sort of squid-like blur going past. So it was sort of pointless if you weren't there. And it's really expensive. And I remember because people used to always try and get me involved in conversations about sports. Love to play them. I don't particularly like to watch them. So for me, I would just put on my biggest, brattiest British accent and say, if somebody from Toronto wanted to talk about the Leafs, I'd say, the Leafs. Yes, I was born in 1966. Isn't that the last time your fine team won? And then it would just be like this surly silence. And at least we'd move on to some other topic, which is usually why I was touring the colonies with this accent that was so exquisitely punchable.
Did you ever play sports?
I've played tons of sports in my life. So I like being engaged in them, but, I'd rather go dancing than watch dancing.
What was your favorite one?
My favorite sport is squash, in fact.
Really?
Oh, I love squash. I love squash because you can really mess up in squash and you get another shot. Like playing golf is really frustrating for me because if you have a good hit, your next 20 minutes are great. And if you have a bad hit, then you have to wait for like 20 minutes to have a good hit again. But if you mess up in squash, 30, a third of a second later, you can be having a good shot. So I kind of like that instantaneous repair stuff. But tennis, a lot of racket sports I really like.
Good for you. I was a water sports gal myself. A rower, swimmer. So rowing was my mainstay, if you will. Rowing, swimming, diving, did a little bit of sailing. And then now in my older years, I do a lot of hiking and rock climbing, oddly enough. Oh. And so every year I try to make it out to a mountain. So Mount Olympus was my last feat. It took me about 3 days to go up and down. But I think as I've gotten older, I like the solitude sort of personal feat ones more so. But I did used to be a great team player growing up too. And of course, with rowing, there might be 4 to 8 people in a boat, but all must move as one. So I did love that.
Every now and then, I don't know if you have, I think everyone does. Every now and then I get these mortality flashbacks where you think back of horribly dangerous things you did in your life and you wonder like, what was I thinking? I was just talking about this with someone the other day. Like when you're young and your whole life is ahead of you, you're ridiculously careless. Now I'm past a half century. I'm like, I have to hoard every day, like Smog with his gold, like Ebenezer Scrooge with a thumbtack because, I have less to spend, but I care about it more. And the only rock climbing I did that was really substantial was in Africa when I was 16. My cousin took me rock climbing, and this was like, I don't know, a couple of 100 meters up with an overhang, no belays, no ropes, no nothing. And looking back on it, I'm like, I still occasionally get, like it's been decades and decades, I still get this sweat occasionally, like a couple of times a year when I remember that. Like, how insane. He actually died later, tragically, doing this kind of stuff. So, when you're young, you don't even think about these consequences. If I'd had a snowsuit, okay, I think I've milked that one long enough.
There you are. Well, there's ice pick climbing as well. With Mount Olympus, you're about 2,900 meters up in the sky. You're above the clouds at certain points, depending on what the coverage is like, and you're just belayed to other people. So I usually go up with, a guide, and it's just us. So if he misses a rock or if I miss a rock, and it's about, I can't remember what the actual degrees is, but you are using your hands and feet at all times. So yeah, it's fun though. It's adventurous.
Now, I've heard tell that you are religious, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the church, the smells, the songs, the glorious songs of Christmas, and what it was like for you growing up in such a Christian family and having a very Christian Christmas.
Right, absolutely. Well, I'm Eastern Catholic, so the Ukrainian Greek Catholic. Basically, we got the best parts of Byzantium and then started respecting the Pope at the same time. So I like to think that we've kind of got the best of all the worlds. Our priests can marry, and we say the divine liturgy of St. John Chrysostom and the rest of it. So ours is a very, very ritualistic church. It's, we call it popery, so to speak, insofar as there's not the whitewashed walls, there's no female priests. It's high, small O orthodoxy, where everywhere there are candles and incense and stained glass and beautiful iconography. There is not a white space anywhere on any of the walls. So going to church is always a feast for all of your senses, never mind if you want to take it to the metaphysical level. And of course, we pray also in song as well. We always say, Ukrainian Catholics say that, singing is twice the prayer. So with the CNE holidays, Christmas and Easter, this was the time for, all this ritual to come into its full glory, if you will, in these highest holy days. So around the Christmas season, there's no shortage during Advent, etc., when it comes to preparation. So right now, for instance, we fast, we do novenas, I'm going to church regularly. But it was always midnight mass on Christmas Eve that even as a young child, I remember being so at peace. And I remember being in these pews with my then, living grandfather, my grandmother, my mother, my sister, and I would nod off in the pews, of course, when it got close to midnight, but hearing all of these beautiful traditional songs sung both in English and in Ukrainian. Carol of the Bells is actually a Ukrainian carol. And so it fulfills you in a way that is, it truly transcends the here and now. It connects you to your past. It makes you hopeful for, the year ahead, the years ahead. And I don't know, there's something about this time of year that is special, I think, for most. But I think that going to church helps optimize all of those potential avenues for joy and excitement, and a sort of almost childish glee, and so going to church for me was always fantastic. And as I've grown up, I've of course gotten way more into my faith. After I was about 18 is when I really started to get way more into my faith, and so I've started to take on the challenges of this Advent season much more seriously, including the fasting and the alms giving. And my mom was amazing, my late mother, because she was like such a fantastic role model and just citizen. And I say that like she was a participant, right? She was a stay-at-home mom, and every Christmas dinner, which we usually had on Christmas Day, she'd invite all of we'd always call Among the Misfits. I wrote a play actually called Among the Misfits based on this loosely. And my mom would, if there was a bachelor on a street, an elderly person on a street, a single mother on our street, that's who'd be at our table. It sounds so silly, like something from the movies, but that's really how we grew up. And there were Christmases where, we weren't exactly living high off the hog. And so it'd be a potluck, everyone just bring your own thing and we're going to be together. And my mom would always introduce people. What was cool is because my family is both on the Gregorian and the Julian calendar. So we kind of get to do the whole thing twice. We do, Christmas Eve on the 24th and again on the 6th. And so when it came time to our Ukrainian festivities, we teach them a little bit about our rites and traditions in the Eastern European faith as well. And so, I've kind of just given you a little bit of a blueprint, but there is just so much there that I learned about just my own tradition, being in the faith, being kind of a participant a neighborly participant in my society, and giving back. And the almsgiving is something that I'm really trying to focus on in this particular juncture of my life. And I don't like, talking about it that much, but I suppose now is a good time because I learned from my mother, And so, I've been trying to do the soup kitchen stuff, helping. We've got, in Toronto, we've got Out of the Cold programs here where a lot of the churches of various denominations open up their doors and serve, soup to the homeless. And I have a special spot in my heart for the homeless. I took a year off from school. I was discerning a call to the nunnery. And I spent a lot of time hanging out with our city's homeless then. And so that was kind of my Advent mission this year, was to focus a lot on the homeless and kind of hear their stories and hear how they might be planning to spend their Christmases, etc. And then, of course, fasting as well, because I think that fasting, what's happened to Christmas, Stefan, is so sad. It's so sad what's happened. This kind of corporate just BS. It's shopping. It's capitalist pigs everywhere. Let me tell you, that we've gotten out of touch with, denying ourselves. It's all about indulging ourselves. And so I find that the fasting is really good for denying your temporal kind of appetites to help make room for hopefully loftier, thoughts and hungers and thirsts as well.
And it's funny, too, because the ascetic sensuality of a Christian church, especially around Christmas, is something entirely underappreciated. The word sensuality has come to mean sort of gross bodily pleasures, but the ascetic sensuality of, nobody sounds better than singing in a church. Everybody should just do the Trinity Sessions thing and sing in the church, because the acoustics are wonderful. The voices lifted up in praise and joy are wonderful. People rarely look better than they are in church because, they're dressed to the nines, and people are rarely more friendly and rarely more generous. That's the part that I remember about going to church as a kid, was that feeling that stuff is for sharing rather than just using. And I think that unity really comes in a very powerful way. And I remember very early on, one of the few times that it snowed in England, when I was at a church in Tenterton with my aunt and my uncle and my cousins. And they were a real scrappy bunch of siblings, and yet every Christmas it was like this spell of peace descended upon them, and they put aside all their differences. And I remember looking out through the stained glass window, and the snow was coming down on the other side of the stained glass window. I was really, really young, but I just remember thinking that it looked very much like angels' wings, floating down against the stained glass window. And it is a beautiful sense of peace and meaning and a connection with more than sort of the skull prison of your own mind to something larger, whether that's community or God for people. That is something that I think is really missing. And then there's the great post-Christmas heartbreak when it seems like people they've kind of gone down to virtue like a pearl diver going down to get a pearl, and they can only stay down so long, and then they come back up, and you get into the squabbles and the nonsense and the pettiness and some of the rank materialism of January, and it's almost like everyone spends too much at Christmas, and then the bill comes due in January and they feel bad. And it's almost like people have this virtue that they indulge in, and this generosity and this peace and this joy that they indulge in. And then somehow after Christmas, there seems to be a permission to diminish that. And that to me was, I really enjoyed it during Christmas, but it's kind of like a last meal, or you get to eat again exactly 12 months from now.
Right. Well, virtue doesn't come just from being born excellent. It's habituation. And if, doing it for maybe 40 days or 12 days or just the 2 days is not really habituation. So it's not any wonder that people kind of fall back into old ways. But getting back into your to point that you made earlier about whether it's community or God, I believe that, or I know that there was a time in the West when God and community were in a sense synonymous. And in Christian Europe was a thing. Christianity, frankly, after the fall of the Roman Empire, where we went into like the so-called Dark Ages, although there's a lot of arguments to be said that they weren't all that dark.
Hey, I don't have to be enslaved to the Roman military for 20 years.
Yeah.
Yay, Dark Ages.
Yeah, exactly. But it was Christianity that really lifted Europe, and that began to define this new Europe that would come after the fact. And you look at 1960s, fast forward, 1960s. America, like 95% of the population identified as Christian or at least being okay with Christian values. A large portion of the population so that they had attended a religious service, Christian religious service, the week before being polled. And all of those numbers have fallen like rocks. And so it's no wonder that everyone is walking around like these atomized, nihilistic, consumer, capitalists, just lumps, and because we've lost what glues us together as a community. And that was, for many people, it was God. It gave us a moral civic code, and all of that is gone now. And it's most depressing, to be honest, but I do have a glimmer of light when I look south of the 49th, and I look at Donald Trump, someone who even campaigned on ending, the war on Christmas, and all the support that he got through that. But I was in New York this past weekend, Stefan. I was down by the Rockefeller Plaza. They've got that big tree, and I see these guys all carrying their AKs and these police. There's a thick police force. And I tweeted this one photo because for me it was so striking. It was this little American girl whose father had to hoist her onto his shoulders so to just, get a glimpse of this Rockefeller tree over top of this thick police line and their tents, etc. And I thought to myself, how sad is this? Because, we used to talk about a war on Christmas being about, capitalism and, consumer interests, etc., over top of this, spiritual, high holy day. But the war on Christmas, we literally need guns now. And it's so depressing how bad we've allowed things to get.
Well, and then the guy who just half blew himself up in New York, he said that he did it because there was an offensive number of posters for Christmas in the subway tunnel. And that is a literal explodey vest war on Christmas. And this is the thing that has been so frustrating for me about dealing with atheist faith, is that for a lot of people, I think particularly on the left, peace comes from satiety. In other words, when you have indulged all your physical senses, whether it's sex or food or drugs or whatever it's going to be, peace comes from satiety, from satiating your physical needs or requirements. But that, of course, you get hungry again. And so it is an endless hamster wheel of satiation and hunger. The Buddhists talk about that too as well. But what I got from a Christian upbringing, which to me was very powerful, was that peace comes not from the indulging of the senses, but peace comes from the restraint. Peace comes from restraint. I mean, if you look at the 60s versus the 50s were an epoch of sexual restraint, stable families, stable communities, and so on. And you get the 60s where, this Pandora's box of rampant sexuality is opened up and everybody's banging everyone. STDs spread like wildfires, families collapse. And the peace that occurred as the result of self-restraint. Because if you don't restrain yourself, then the government has to chase after you with a net and try and restrain for you, or tax people to pay for the consequences of your bad single mom decisions and so on. But there was this huge switch, and it happened so quickly. And people blame the pill. I don't think it was the pill at all. But this idea that the only peace you're going to get is after you've satisfied your physical wants versus you get peace from disciplining your physical wants. That to me was a big switch. And I held on to that for my Christian upbringing, and it served me well. But I have found that a lot of atheists look for peace and satiation rather than self-restraint. And I think it causes society to develop significant cracks.
There are so many factors that have gone into this war, and the war on Christmas, so to speak, is just a symptom of the greater war on Christian and Western civilization. Christianity, of course, being the cradle faith of Western civilization. And look, it's very clear. This 28-year-old bomber, whose name sounds like Allahu Akbar, I don't even remember what it was, a failed bomber at that. What he has done is he has made it very clear he is waging a war on the Christian European majority and way of life. Well, what we've got right now across the West is an invasion, and our invaders are very, very keen on undoing that majority, undoing that way of life. And regrettably, we have their allies instituted in all sorts of different parts of opinion-making businesses across our media, across our entertainment industries, etc., who also hate the Christian, European West, frankly, and it's come through various different lobbies, the cultural Marxists, so to speak, who always had a thing out for family and for church, because of course those were, as you rightly pointed out, the peacemaking, the order creating institutions, and they don't want that, because what they want is chaos. Because when there's chaos, then all of a sudden, boom, their government policies can implement some sort of different sort of...
And if you can't rely on a community horizontally, you end up being dependent on a political hierarchy.
Right, and that's exactly it. And when you believe in God, you say, well, this government seems immoral. This government seems like they're out to get us, They want me to invite a whole bunch of people in who hate me, who hate my family, who hate my church. Like, this seems silly, But all of a sudden, when I don't have any sort of identity as a child of God or as a European, well, then everyone can come in because it's a multi-culti, dystopia, and these enrichment officers are just a price that we have to pay in order to achieve that noble goal of multiculturalism. I mean, when you start to see it that way, it becomes really, really clear that the war on Christmas is a war on Christianity, which is the cradle faith of Western civilization, i.e., all the European goodies that the world wants. And it's a lot of people will mean like, oh, the war on Christmas, like, who cares? It really does matter, folks. It really does matter. And circling back to that little girl, I mean, the fact that this next generation, all they're going to know are Christmas trees and nutcrackers, and I'm guessing within the next 10 years, churches that are heavily armed. We have not passed the torch forward. And let me tell you, just based on demographics, the same torch is frankly going to come back and burn us.
Well, this is the thing that I wanted to mention as well, because we both have talked about this quite a bit. When it comes to self-restraint, I think, there's this big problem online, and it happens in politics. It happens everywhere. This what's called virtue signaling, which is people who want to look good rather than do good, who want to gain the approval of shallow surface appearance of virtue rather than engage in the deep, often hard and unpopular work of actually being good. And one of the great weaknesses in the West at the moment is this pathological altruism. It is, in a sense, Christian charity gone amok, without the restraint of virtue or any kind of in-group preference. And I think, to me, the discipline to say, well, charity is good, and taking in people is good, and helping people out is good, but we cannot do it wantonly. We certainly cannot do it to people who fundamentally oppose our values. That is a form of cultural suicide. And I think having that kind of restraint, people are absolutely unrestrained in this, we'll take all the refugees in the known universe. We'll not defend our own culture. We'll say everything's multicultural while continuing to defer to other cultures. And it is almost like licentiousness in the realm of ethics spins towards a significant vice.
Regrettably, what's happened within many church institutions and sort of surrounding bodies is a complete infestation of a Marxist agenda, of homosexual apologists, and even some child diddlers, frankly. And they have perverted the word of God. And the laity, regrettably, have not used this Protestant work ethic, this individual spirit to go ahead and read the books themselves and correct our hierarchy where they have fallen short. We're constantly told, love your neighbor. What's the other part of that sentence? Love your neighbor like yourself. We are commanded to love ourselves. Suicide is not allowed within my faith, okay? And that is exactly what we're doing over right now. God does not say, bring in a bunch of your enemies and, let them live in your house and kill your family. Like, that's not part of our faith. That is such a strange, perversion. Even, the entitlement culture that is basically attracting all of these people over here. Tithing, like, you want to talk about God's tax? It's 10% flat. Figure out what you want to do with it, the government. Other than that, you're not entitled to my money. Like, I believe in Godonomics. 10% flat tax, that's it. They can figure out what to do with it. And if you can't afford your programs, time to nip them in the butt. And if that means the rest of the world doesn't want to come here as economic migrants, sorry, not sorry. They can build up their own countries and figure it out. But Christians today, under this almost occupied church, and I'm not talking about the Catholic Church right here, but there are many, many different kind of subsidiary factions of it, like, our press, etc. Catholics today have bought into this notion that Jesus Christ was a divine Robin Hood that wants to just, steal from the rich and give to the poor. And by the way, the poor includes, all, however many billions of the world's Muslims. No, like, that's not true. Actually, our people have been persecuted by Muslims how many times in history? It's why the Crusades had to be called, right? We've played this movie. We know how it ends. We have to fight back. But regrettably, again, I think even within the Catholic Church, which I think is really the only church that would be prepared, frankly, to take on the Islamification of the West, the infiltration of the West. Regrettably, I think our leadership is such now that while on theological ordinances we're still good, but on practical ordinances we've really run amok.
Well, then a lot of churches have become dependent on the state for huge amounts of income as part of these resettlement grants, right? So they take the refugees or the so-called refugees, often just economic opportunists or welfare state opportunists. They're taking hundreds of millions of dollars from the state, and it's very, very easy to get corrupted by that money. These are the 30 pieces of silver of the modern age.
I believe that churches should pay tax. I believe that so we can do whatever the heck we want. So we don't have to keep on taking orders, frankly, from the government. I think that, our Catholic school system, for instance, in my province, I would like to see it go private because instead what we have is basically the state telling us what we can and cannot teach our children. And it's too bad because, again, it's a problem of the gatekeepers. And we haven't remained vigilant around the gateposts, regrettably. And so all of this, there's so much work to be done. But the good news is I do believe that there is a charismatic renewal that's happening, and it's happening both in the church and it's near customers as well. You see some of these rates of the Gen Zs and the millennials. They're going to church more than their parents did. There is a hunger and thirst, and this is where I think the Hegelian dialectic perspective has a point, if you will, insofar as we've had this thesis of this, utilitarian and, also this like temporal appetite-driven way of life, and they're saying, well, now hold on a second, nothing works. I don't like the women that I'm looking at. They're dressed like, whatever. I don't like the men that they're looking at because they're acting like whatever. I want some sort of order in my life. I want a moral code. And well, here's one that's lasted for about 2,000 years. So let's see if this works. And so you're seeing, the pew numbers go up. And I have to say that even in the churches that I frequent, I'm seeing it used to be Q-tips, as I like to call them, white hair, white socks. It's not just the Q-tips anymore. It's a lot of young, beautiful people who are interested in politics, in philosophy, and in securing a future that they feel has not been secured for them. And they want a moral compass along the way. And so they're coming back to the faith. And I think some of them are there for intellectual and pragmatic reasons out of the gates, where I know that, being a cultural Christian would be in my interest. And then they get there and inevitably will have some sort of a metaphysical experience, and they hang out and they stay, and it's been really beautiful. And even some of these, up and coming YouTube stars and the rest of it, you hear them talking about God, and even if it's just in a cultural way, it's been very, very edifying for me to watch.
And you said Q-tip, I hear cue ball, but I know what you're saying. So let's go with what you would like people to hear in Canada, in the West, in these troubling times of cultural conflict. What is it that you would most like people to hear? I mean, there are people, of course, who are already in your corner, so to speak, in your pew. What are the other people who are lost, who are maybe nervous, who are uncertain? What is it that you would like most to tell them this Christmas?
There is a demographic and a spiritual replacement that is taking place right now. And absolutely no one is going to fight for us except for us. We have to come to a point where we can admit the fact that while we are a society of individuals, we will have to band together as a church, as a body of Europeans, as Americans, as Canadians, and we have to fight for our way of life, because it has never in modern history been so under attack as it is right now, and it's situation critical. We have about 25 years in America, we have about 25 years in Canada, and just a little bit longer than that in Europe, to accomplish what we want. Otherwise, just based on demographics, more people are going to mosques than they're going to church. More people are naming their kids Muhammad than they are any one of the apostles' names. And more people are coming in, frankly, from the third world, from Africa, Middle East, and Asia than they are from European nations. So the numbers will turn against us within less than a generation. And so the time is now. We have to wake up, and we have to realize that it's self-preservation or it's suicide.
Yeah, demographics is one of these things that starts off like a snowflake and ends up as a tsunami of snow. And the sooner you can alter its course, the easier things are. Well, thanks very much for, these rousing words. Christmas is about peace, but it's also about dedication and fighting for the great values that our ancestors, our Christian ancestors, have handed down to us. So thanks so much for your time, Faith. I really, really appreciate it. Just want to remind people you can follow Faith on twitter.com/FaithGoldy and youtube.com/Faith J. Goldy. Thank you so much for your time today.
Merry Christmas.